this episode, I answer a common question from clients practicing the infinite banking concept. When should I buy policies on my kids? I'm Nate. I make sense out of money. This is Dollars and Nonsense. If you follow the herd, you will be slaughtered. All right, welcome back to the show, everyone. Great to have you. I think for pretty much anyone who's practicing infinite banking, especially if you have kids, of course, the thought comes across your mind, should I be buying policies on my kids? When should I be buying policies on my kids? How does it look to buy policies on my kids? And maybe should I just only buy policies on my kids because of this whole idea of that I've heard from the general public that insurance gets more expensive the older you get, and they're younger than I am. And so maybe I should buy policy on them. So I'm here to try to set the record straight on when does it make sense to buy policies on your kids. So we're going to dive into trying to answer and alleviate some of what I call the myths or the misconceptions of buying policies on kids. Primarily that it's cheaper per se, or somehow it will end up in a better result. I think that's way overplayed and probably not accurate. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to start diving into some of the main reasons why you should, when you should, how it works when you do, the limitations towards it, and we'll try to answer all from all angles. So let's go ahead and dive in. So first off, some reasons not to buy policies on your kids. There is this prevalent myth out there, and the thing about most myths is that there is some truth to it while most of it's incorrect. And that's definitely the case whenever it comes to buying policies on kids. There's this myth out there that policies are cheaper or they're more efficient or they're going to make us more money if I buy them on a younger person as opposed to an older person because cost of insurance goes up as you age. And there is some element of truth to this. It just doesn't really apply that often to the infinite banking world. So whenever you buy whole life insurance policies with max paid up addition riders and dumping in large amounts of cash value, and that's your primary focus, the age has very little, if any, effect at all on the performance of the policy. And so here's why. Whenever you hear in the world that insurance gets more expensive as you age, what people are actually referring to is the fact that an older individual has to pay more premium to get a certain level of death benefit. So if I wanted to buy $1 million of life insurance coverage, $1 million of death benefit, and I'm 50 years old, I have to pay more money than I would if I was 20 years old buying $1 million of life insurance. So let's just say that, and you can use it whether it's whole life or term, that same thing would apply. So you could say if a whole life policy needs $10,000 of base premium to get $1 million of coverage, just making that up, at 50 years old, then maybe it only needs $2,000 or $3,000 of base premium whenever you're 20 years old. And so people look at that and they say, well, it's more expensive then. I got to put more money in to get that amount of death benefit. The reason that it doesn't really apply well for IBC, infinite banking, is because we're not in it for the death benefit to begin with. We're in it mainly for the cash value. The death benefit is a huge value add to the whole mix, but we're in it mainly for the cash value. And since we're in it for the cash value, the question is, well, does the 50-year-old putting in 10 grand or does the 20-year-old putting in 3 grand, they're going to get the same death benefit, but which one's going to have more cash value? Well, definitely the 50-year-old's going to end up having more cash value because they're putting so much more money in. So the issue is that the idea of insurance gets more expensive as you age is typically just simply referring to a very true reality that as you get older, you have to put more premium dollars in to achieve the same level of death benefit as a younger person. But that has no correlation on cash value. So then you could rewind this whole thing and say, well, what if the 50-year-old and the 20-year-old were just going to put in 10 grand each? Instead of caring about matching the death benefit numbers, why don't we just say we're going to match the inputs? We're going to put the same amount of money in for the 50-year-old and the 20-year-old. The 20-year-old is going to have more death benefit, but the question really should be to all of us, well, who's going to have more cash value? And the reality is they're going to be almost the same. Almost the same. I mean, maybe over a long period of time, the 20-year-old is going to have more cash value, but I mean, it would be marginal, very minimal. The main difference as you get older or younger is the amount of death benefit is purchased by $1. And so I wanted to kind of stomp this out, that some people come to me and they're in great shape. They're in their 40s, 50s, and they've got kids and they're like, hey, I want to do this IBC thing, but I'm a little older. Maybe I'll just do it on my 10-year-old. Maybe I'll just do it on my 15-year-old. Buy policies on them because it's going to be better. I would just try to push back on that. Say, hey, let's stamp that out. That's not the actual reason you should buy policies on kids, because it's not exactly true for the infinite banking concept. It's not a reality that the policies on your children are going to produce better cash value results than the policies on you. In a vacuum, that's just not exactly true. So that should lead us to saying, number one, Nate, when should I buy a policy on my kids? It probably shouldn't be your first policy that you ever buy. In fact, I would highly recommend to buy policies on themselves first. So if it's a married couple, make sure that you and your spouse are heavily insured with policies before you start moving down to the next generation in almost every circumstance. So here's the next point. Well, if it's not any better to buy policy on kids, then why would I ever? So let's dive into that question. And that's when we get to the actual reasons, the real reasons. So the real reason is not because it's more efficient for some, factor. I would say that with a caveat, if you have some health issues, some significant health issues, or maybe if you're in your 70s and things like that, then looking for a healthier person, maybe a younger person may end up actually creating some real applicable results. But for the vast majority of people who are relatively healthy and not 75 yet, then normally focusing on you first is probably going to be the primary focus as you get started with IBC. So then the question is, if it's not because of efficiency, then what is it? So there's many reasons, many pros to starting policies on your kids, and we've talked about some on this podcast, and I'm just going to kind of blast them out, machine gun approach, just to get these all done. But I'm going to talk about a wide variety without any sort of order. So there's not like a ranked order, but one of the things that I've talked about in the past is, and I've told this story before, I'll tell it again. Our third son, his name is Sam, and our third son, for all three of my boys, by the way, I've got 3 boys and there's a 4th one on the way. And for all 3 of my boys, I bought policies on them essentially as soon as they were out of the womb. 2 weeks out of the chute, we're filling out an application and submitting to the insurance company, getting it in force. And so all 3 of my boys get policies right off the bat. And there's some reasons why to do this. So first off, of course, I'm heavily insured. My wife's heavily insured. So now it automatically makes sense for kids to get going. And I'm going to give you all the reasons why I do this. But to go back to Sam, my third son, after I remember the day that it was issued and it got mailed out and we received it in the mail. And I remember at the time our applications team, they kind of brought me the policy. Hey, Nate, the policy ready to go. This was even before electronic issue was like a normal thing, by the way. So a lot of times now everything's done electronically. Back then it was actually real mail package of paper that you have to sign and send back in to put the policy in force. And they came to me and they said, "Hey, Nate, here's your son's policy. Go, you can sign it and give it to me tomorrow, and we'll submit it then." And I remember I was sitting in the office. And I was like, "Well, it's right here. Why don't I just sign it now?" So I signed the policy, got a check, wrote the check, gave it back, and we UPS'd it overnight. It was that evening we had to take him to the hospital because he had some weird medical issues at the time. And nothing serious. I mean, everything's totally solved now, but because of that, he's technically been uninsurable until we do some further tests that we don't really believe we need to do. So I'm not going to get into too much of the weeds there. All I'm saying is that was when he was 0 years old. He's now 4, and he's only got that one policy that I got on him the day before he became uninsurable, like right around that same time. If I had waited till the next day, I would have had to report back to the insurance company before they placed it in force that, hey, something may have changed in his insurability, and I would have been required to put that out. But since I signed it, put it in, it was in the UPS box and ready to, and it was already in the mail being delivered, that I made it by the skin of my teeth. And the reason I bring this up is, for everybody, one of the reasons to get policies on your kids is you never know what's going to happen to them, first off. So not only you don't know what's going to happen to their health, you don't know what's going to happen, great accidents, of course, happen. No one's guaranteed tomorrow. Of course, not you, not your kids. So there's twofold there. Number one, if you get a policy as soon as you can on them while we know they're healthy and we know they're insurable, then if they were ever to get some sort of condition that would cause them to become uninsurable, they can have this policy in force for the rest of their life and no one can ever take it away. So the reason why this is a huge value to me, and the reason I bring it up first, is because I'm experiencing this. I do believe that my third son is going to be able to get more policies. It's just we haven't done the test the insurance companies want us to do to get him approved. But it's already in force. It's already ready. It doesn't matter what happens anymore. The policy is his. He can carry it for him from the rest of his life, no matter what happens, no matter if he ever gets uninsurable or remains uninsurable for whatever reason. The policy is his. And the same thing goes for all of my kids. So there's that aspect of it, that it's, hey, as soon as you get the policy on your kids, it's something that they can carry with them for the rest of their lives. No one can ever take it away. In that same vein, of course, a morbid conversation that I don't even really want to bring up, but of course you never know what's going to happen. No one's promised tomorrow. And if something was to happen to one of my kids, I would want to have the financial ability to take a break and take a step back dramatically. So this is why I also don't think, getting policies that are so small that they're practically like a final expense style, like, like a $25,000 of death benefit or $50,000 of death benefit is always a good idea. Sometimes I think it should be bigger than that, because I don't want to just have some cash on hand, for the arrangements afterwards. I would want to be able to take a total step back at my life, focus as much time as I want to on my family. So I recommend, if you can, get a decent sized policy on them whenever you're financially able to, so that you can breathe, you can mourn properly. You don't feel pressured and stressed. You can take a look at your life. You can take a look at your family and have financial issues not be a problem in that moment of trauma.
Are you tired of feeling like everyone has their hand in your pocket? At Living Wealth, we believe in challenging the status quo. After all, most of those conventional tools only seem to make someone else rich. Let us show you how to take back control by banking on yourself. Visit livingwealth.com/escape the bank. You'll receive instant access to what we call the beginner's course. This free, in-depth, easy-to-follow course teaches people how to create and profit from infinite banking. We not only discuss the philosophy and principles behind infinite banking, but also offer real-life examples to demonstrate how it works. Even folks experienced with infinite banking often tell us they learned a ton too. So, it's worthwhile regardless of your experience level. Stop letting banks and Wall Street dictate your financial future. Again, that's livingwealth.com/escape the bank to gain access to the free course today. Now back to Nate and Holly.
To answer the question of when, I think you should get policy on your kids as soon as possible, but I don't think you should do it before you are properly insured. So in other words, you don't want to start policy on your kids if your death benefit and your policy levels for you and your spouse are lacking. You want to get you guys up to the level, the parents and that generation need to be adequately insured before you start seeking out policies on your children, because you don't want to be taking money that should be going into policies on you to protect your children. So in other words, if you were to pass away, of course, it would be a much bigger dramatic impact on your kids than if they passed away financially. Of course, they're not the breadwinner for the family. So you definitely want to make sure you and your spouse are fully covered in a proper way before you start transitioning into policy on the next generation. So the answer is as soon as possible, but make sure that it's not taking away from your ability to get you and your spouse where you want to be. Then you start focusing on getting policy as soon as possible on your kids for those emotional reasons I brought up, number one. But number two, as far as when is concerned, it is the sooner a policy is in force, the more money it makes. You want to get policies in force sooner rather than later. There's never any benefit in waiting to do anything financially. Like if you have the ability to do something financially, you should do it as opposed to waiting, because waiting just leaves out opportunity cost. If you're 10 years old and you start a policy on your child, and let's assume they live until age 90 to make it easy. So they're going to live until age 90. That means the policy is going to be in force for 80 years. If you were to wait until they were 15 to start a policy on their life, then they'll only be able to own that policy for 75 years. 75 years, excuse me. And so the reason why I bring this up is that the policy and the cash value and the death benefits and so forth that are going to be built up in that policy, what shocks some people to really consider is that whenever you delay starting a policy, it's not like you are escaping the early years. Every policy starts with day one. Whether you're 10 years old or 15 years old, you have day one, you have day two, you have year one, year two, year three. The difference though, when you delay a start, is you actually knock off the last 5 years of the policy. That's really what you're doing. So both policies are going to have year 1, year 10, year 50, year 60, year 75. But then at year 75, one of them's gone. If you waited until you were 15 to start policy on your kids. While the other one's going to have year 76, year 77, year 78, year 79, year 80. And the big difference is, what would you think are going to be the most profitable years of owning that policy? It's year 76, 77, 78, 79, and year 80. And anything with compound growth, the longer it's enforced, the more profitable it is. So the sooner you can start policy on your kids, the better off those policies will be. They'll be able to carry it for the rest of their lives. No one can take it away. If something was to happen to them, they would give you place to mourn and grieve the way you want to. And it's going to create a situation where the most profitable years are going to exist, as opposed to being cut off at year 75 in our little hypothetical example. So you want them to be enforced as long as possible. You should start them as quickly as possible. How you do it is there are some limitations and some rules. So first off, kids don't have to go through, like if you're under 16 and under, for sure, most of the time 18 and under, you don't have to take a medical exam or anything like that. So it's actually a relatively easy approval process. The reason why it's not a shoo-in, though, is you can't just buy any size policy you want on your children. The insurance companies have rules, actually, for how much you can purchase on your child. And the most common industry-wide standard for policy on kids is that the kid's death benefit cannot exceed 50% of the parent's death benefit. So if the parent has $1 million of death benefit, and by the way, any policy counts towards this. So you add up all your policies, whether you have term and work policies and infinite banking policies, you add them all up. And let's say you have $1 million of death benefit, then that means that the kid's policy can only have $500,000 of death benefit by rule. The issue actually becomes, though, that as we've already talked about, whenever you start a policy and start putting premium dollars into a very, very young person, the death benefit numbers are really big at the scale that you're putting in. So what you think is a small policy actually buys a lot of death benefit on kids because they're so young. There's going to be so many years of premiums to be paid. So the death benefit is much higher, as we already talked about. Remember, the younger you are, the cash value is not necessarily more efficient, but of course the death benefit is bigger. There's going to be way more premiums collected. I mean, it's just obvious. So with that being said, sometimes you are limited on how big the policy can even be. You may want to put in more money to a policy on your kids than they'll even let you. There's ways around it, but essentially the how is it's pretty simple, but there's going to be some limitations. And, that especially comes into play for the next reason we're going to talk about is that I believe that policies are a far better source of capital than like a 529 plan would be. So 529 college savings plans, they make some assumptions. First off, they assume, so if you have a baby, by the way, he's 1 year old, how do you even know he's going to go to college? So you're saving money into a 529 plan for something that may or may not even happen. And reality is, I look at the scope of college and university education. I'm not opposed to it by any stretch. In fact, I think some people in our movement are maybe more opposed to college education than I am. I'm not even opposed to it at all. But I'm looking at the horizon, I'm like, man, colleges are, they are messed up. Most universities are totally messed up. And so I don't even know if I'd want my kids to go in 18 years from now. Who knows? But they're very limited on what you can use the 529 plans to do. So I do believe that policies fit a better bill of being like a 529 savings plan, because we can use it for many other things. They can use their policy while they're still going to high school to buy a car. And they can finance their car, they can start learning. So there's going to be two things tied into one. Number one, we all like to set money aside to help our kids get a good start in life, whether it's a 529 plan or helping them buy their car or whatever it is. And so I think policies are the best place to do that. And then secondly, if you have a policy with their name on it, it creates a sense of ownership. It creates a sense of responsibility for their own thing. So you can teach them the principles of banking and the principles of wealth building and saving money and accumulating capital. You can teach all of these principles with a policy that has their name on it, and it just means more. It means more than if they borrow a policy from dad. So I've got my own policies and I'm lending money from my banking system. They can learn a little bit, but they're going to take a far higher level of ownership if the policy has their name on it. Now, they may not own it. They won't own it, by the way. You'll own it. The owner is the only person who has any rights in a policy to use cash value or to make any sort of changes to the policy, to pay premiums. The insured, for lack of a better term, is just the body that the policy is insuring. And so even though they're only the insured on the policy, it still produces the sense of ownership that doesn't exist. And I think it's fair that takes place, but I'm just merely saying, even though they don't own it, it produces a sense of ownership. And so they can learn with their own policy what they're going to be doing with it as time goes on. They can use it to finance their college. They can repay it over time as if they had funded their own student loans. And all the while, hopefully they understand how it's building them wealth and allowing them to generate large amounts of capital they can use to build the life they want to live. And the reason why it's a better addition than I believe a 529 plan is because you can use the policy to start a business. They can use the policy to do other entrepreneurial things if that's the route they want to go, as opposed to getting a formal education. So I think it's just a better tool. That's why, we call it private family financing here. It's like we believe that the family unit can achieve things if they stick together. And the reality is family banking, it just makes sense for everybody to have their own policies and be using their own policies. Even if they're not ready to own the policy yet, then it creates, but this is my policy. I'm going to get it sometime. Most of the time when parents start policies on kids, they do have an intent to pass the ownership to their children at some point in time. Sometimes it's a firm date, sometimes it's more nebulous. And so in this, I wanted to say you don't have to pass them ever to your kids. You can start a policy insuring your kids for all the benefits of it and then technically own it for the rest of your life. There's no default, I'm going to give it to them. There's no requirement to ever transfer ownership to them. It would just make sense a lot of times to do so at some point. So for me, for my goal, I'll use it as they grow up. They'll finance their cars, we'll finance their education, we'll do things from it. And then after all that dust settles, I will transfer the ownership to them when I think they're financially ready and capable to handle the banking system that we've built together. And that's the most often the case. Sometime in their 20s, we transfer the policy down to them. In other words, while they're growing up, by the way, I have no qualms with using the policy. It's my money, right? I'm putting it in. I'm going to use it for them. But if I have an investment opportunity, I need to pull money from one of the policies, so be it. It's my capital. Of course, I'm going to repay it, be an honest banker, do the right thing, because I do have it set aside for them. Some people do, though. They say, Nate, I want to start this policy and I'm never going to touch it. I don't want to touch it. This is for them. I'm just capitalizing it. I want to give them a leg up in life. I'm never going to use it. And that's perfectly fine. I have never used my kids' policies. They're my last resort, but I'm just saying, hey, if there was an opportunity that came and I needed capital for my kids' policies, let's go. It's my banking system, at least as it stands right now. There are other routes, too, that you can go with buying policies on kids that are more complex. I think they're maybe beyond the scope of this episode, but essentially things of, having trust-owned policies on kids. You can have different things that take place to transfer money out of your estate, of course. It's very common to do that. You can even gift money. So you can open up a trust and gift money to the trust, and the trust buys policies on the children. And you can transfer money out of your estate that way. And sometimes people will even have trusts in the name of their kids that technically buy policies on the grown-ups, on the parents. And so then the death benefit that passes would pass outside of the estate because you're technically gifting them the money to buy the policy on the parents. And so there's other types of models out there that exist that could be great, but those are more for estate planning situations. I do think, though, to sum all of this up, that it would be wise if you're going to own policies on your children that you do have at least a simple trust, like a simple living trust that is what's called the contingent owner of the policies. So the default policy is you own the policy and you are the insured on the policy. So that's the default. I buy a policy on me, default. Anytime you buy a policy on someone else's life, what happens when you die to the policy? Well, it's just an asset of your estate now, and it's either your will may decide where it goes, or probate will decide where it goes, or something will decide who's going to end up owning that policy. And oftentimes it ends up going to the insured, whoever the insured was, is kind of the default owner when the dust settles. But it's just no sense in going through all that garbage. Just simply put a contingent owner of the policy. So, hey, if I own a policy on my children, I'm the owner, they're the insured. If I die, who now owns the policy? Or what if me and my wife both pass away? Who owns the policy then? You would want to be listed a contingent owner of a trust, typically. Just a simple living trust that the ownership of the policy would pass into the trust upon your death and for the benefit of your children. So let's say you passed away and your children are only 10 and 8 years old. Well, of course, you don't want them to directly own the policy, nor could they really. So you'd want the trust to be there and to be in place for that. And that's just kind of estate planning 101. So all that to say, it would be nice. It's not required. It would certainly be nice to have a living trust, be the contingent owner of policies you own on your children. So if something were to happen to you, the trust would become the owner, and there would be documented rules and procedures for what's going to happen to those policies in the years to come. And the trustee would manage the trust on your behalf even after your passing. So that's it. That's when should I buy policies on my kids? Right away. Don't do it for some myth believed about efficiency's sake. Make sure you guys, as parents, you and your spouse are adequately funded and capitalized in your own banking systems, especially when it comes to your death benefits overall. Then, as soon as that is settled, and as soon as you have the financial capability, open policy on your kids. You want them to be enforced as long as possible, and you want to start teaching them how to use the policies for everyday things, whether it's buying cars or going to school. And you hopefully will have a trust set up to house those in the case that you pass away, and your kids are still minors, of course. Either way, you probably want to list them as contingent owner if you want them to pass to them. Maybe you own them and they are adult children. You could have them be specifically the contingent owner as opposed to the trust per se. As we sum all this up, it's very appealing to me to own policy on my kids. I love owning policy on my kids. There's so much emotional peace of mind about having these policies on my kids that I'm funding, and just being able to see the future that it's providing for them is just, it's incalculable. And so there's more to it. There is a sense of accomplishment that exists when you fund policy on your kids that I want everyone to experience. I don't want you to do it for the wrong reason. I want you to do it for the right reasons. And I want you to be financially capable of owning these after you guys are properly set up. Well, it's been a pleasure. Once again, if you're getting value from this, like, subscribe, rate, review, comment, any sort of things that can help the algorithms love us. We're trying to actively grow our channel. We appreciate you all so much. Thanks for spending time with us. This has been Dollars and Nonsense. If you follow the herd, you will be slaughtered.
Listener, one last thing before you go. Start your journey towards financial security and wealth today. Visit livingwealth.com/escape the bank. Upon completing this course, you'll have all the information that you'll need to see if infinite banking is right for you. Again, go to livingwealth.com/escape the bank.